Big headline heading into the weekend. Terrence Shannon, the All-American from Illinois, was found not guilty of rape by a jury of his peers in Kansas late last week. Obviously, just simply put, great for him to be found not guilty of such a serious crime. Also great to have this all wrapped up in advance of the 2024 NBA draft, because had it not been, it would have been a cloud just hanging over the entire situation that I think you could reasonably assume would have impacted his fortunes next week. Now, I don't know that it should. In fact, I don't think that it should. Norlander, you put together a mock draft. Would you have Terrence Shannon in your first round right now?
I would. I'm working on a mock right now that will either go up on Wednesday or Thursday of this week. It's basically the big board draft that I do every year, where I try and project out the career, who I think will wind up being the best pros in a given draft. And this, on a side note, I am less enthused about this class than frankly anyone that I have done since I've really started following the draft in this kind of realm through this scope since like 09-ish. It's kind of wild. But that aside, I will have Terrence Shannon Jr. somewhere in that top 20. I think he projects as someone who can have a long-lasting NBA career, unquestionably. And I think he's got the size, the skill set. If he can become more of a committed defender, all the better. But he certainly has an NBA ready body and can be a very like plug and play swing. And so yeah, this news that came down obviously worked very much in his favor. And I think the hope and intention for a while now was to get this trial set and get it done before the draft happened, so that there would be a decision one way or a verdict one way or the other, so that there could be clarity on it. And he was found not guilty of the two charges that were held against him previously for rape and sexual battery. It's a major significant headline, and this was a story that loomed over college hoops basically from December, when the story became known. The allegations date back to a trip he took to Kansas last fall, and then up through the end of Illinois season, which I saw end in person when UConn took him out in Boston with that famous 30-0 run. Shannon's attorney, Mark Sutter, put out a statement last week that said, as we stated in September 23, we emphatically denied these charges and waited for our day in court. That time has come. The jury has spoken and justice was served. The public at large owes Terrence Shannon Jr. an apology. Meantime, a spokesperson for the Douglas County DA office said, "It takes tremendous courage for a survivor of sexual assault to come forward. We will continue to pursue justice on behalf of survivors." Obviously, Illinois fans, in light of this news coming down, quite vocal, and to no surprise whatsoever with that. But in fallout of this verdict here, I think it's important every time that we have one of these cases, and it is unfortunate to even acknowledge the fact that it feels inevitable that we will have one again. I'd love to never have another one of these ever, period. But you look at the history of this stuff, and it just seems like it's inevitable it will surface again. Everything should be treated on a case-by-case basis with consideration to parties on both sides, both alleged perpetrators and alleged victims in this. And Terrence Shannon Jr. did have his name, cleared by a not guilty verdict by a jury of his peers. What is interesting in this is that he and his team were so definitive on this. Mitch Gilfillan, who is an attorney and a former college basketball coach who was tweeting about the trial and followed it from the start, he said 2 weeks ago, the DA office offered Terrence Shannon Jr. a plea deal in which he would have a sexual assault conviction on his record, but there would be a promise of no jail time. Otherwise, he probably would have been on probation. There were other stuff that was dealing with, but it was basically like, we can strike the deal now. We promise you, you won't go to jail. You'll just have this on your record. They flat out refused to do that because they had full confidence in his story, in Terrence Shannon Jr.'s story, and the trial that would come to pass. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And Shannon Jr. was found not guilty in what was, of course, a very high-profile story, and something that served as an uncomfortable backdrop amid what was the NCAA tournament, and an Illinois team that was, frankly, if it wasn't in UConn's region, would have been capable of making the Final Four.
I had a few people ask me, like, is this really just, as far as his NBA draft stock and all of that stuff, now a non-issue, or is it still something that will come up? I asked some folks who work in front offices, and they said it's still something. If we were talking to him, we would want to talk to him about it, but like nothing that came out in the trial um, suggests that there was any issue there, and obviously was found not guilty. So the impression I was left with was that it's mostly a non-issue now. They will evaluate him largely on his basketball ability, and I could certainly see him going in the 20s. I would personally have him in the 30s, but I do think he will hear his name get picked next week, which is awesome if it happens, because there was a moment where it looked like that was very much up and down. You read the statement from the attorney, him mentioning that folks owe Terrence Shannon an apology, and I'm sure somebody does, and I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but like my mentions have been in shambles even before.
Have they?
Even before the verdict came down, started. I'm sure I've seen you get. Yeah, you're in it.
I've been tagged.
Yeah, right.
Just a couple hundred times.
All right. And so it's just a lot of wild stuff. It even started before the verdict came in, like apologize to Terrence Shannon. You owe Terrence Shannon an apology. You owe Terrence Shannon an apology for calling him a rapist. And as respectfully as I can say this, I didn't do any of that. None of it. I never called him a rapist. In fact, we only talked about this entire situation on this podcast twice. I wrote about it once. That's the entirety of our conversations about this. The first time we talked about it, which was the day that he was arrested, if you go back and watch it, among the first things I say is that it is important to understand that false allegations do happen all the time in these types of situations. And and this isn't a popular thing to say, particularly given the way I vote in elections, but there's a sentiment out there, and we've talked about this before, where people say, you should believe all women, always believe women, always believe women. And why I understand the idea behind that, logically, that has never made sense to me, because what that suggests is that nobody has ever lied about an interaction with another person, that nobody has ever falsely accused another person of sexual assault. And so I just don't subscribe to that. Like I had a roommate, I've told this story before, either in college or right out of college, who was accused of sexual assault falsely. It was a completely made up story. And like the cops knocked on our door and they investigated the whole thing. He was never charged because the case fell apart quickly, and the woman recanted her story once video evidence proved that she was making it up. After she admitted she was making it up. But that was a scary situation. So like quite literally among the first things I ever said about this when you and I talked about it was that exactly, right? And then we kind of just left it there. He was suspended because Illinois had a policy in place that automatically triggered that suspension. You charge with this type of crime, it automatically triggers this suspension. And we just sort of left it there. And then I believe he missed 6 games, and he went to court and he got the injunction, and he was reinstated to the team, at which point we talked about it again. And even at that point, and what I wrote about it, and to this day, please, I invite anybody, go find it if you can find it. The idea that I need to apologize to him for calling him a rapist just is like, so it'd be like asking me to apologize for stealing a car. Like, I didn't steal a car. I didn't call anybody a rapist. You ready for this? Never even offered an opinion about guilt or innocence ever. Not one time throughout the entire thing of Terrence Shannon. To the extent that I had an issue with how this unfolded, it was with the way Illinois handled it, because I thought they took a convenient way out of it. When he was arrested, and we'll keep this simple and then we'll move on. When he was arrested, they announced the suspension and explained that they have this policy in place, and it automatically triggers a suspension. Like, hey, this is the way we handle these situations. And by the way, the reasons a lot of universities have similar policies is because there's a history in college athletics of selective punishment, right? Mm-hmm. The 6th leading scorer gets charged with something very serious. You're suspended. We can't have you representing us. The All-American gets charged with something serious. Well, we don't have all the facts yet. And to sort of eliminate the idea of that kind of stuff happening, policies were put in place. It's not the only reason, but it's on the list of reasons. So Illinois triggers this policy, and that's that. Well, then Terrence Shannon goes to court, which is exactly what I would have done if I were him, I guess. I don't blame him at all. Like, he was doing what's best for him. I understand.
Yeah, he was in effect suing the university.
That's right.
Because this case, just we can keep it moving here, but as a refresher, and this, I just don't remember many instances like this. It wasn't unprecedented, but we don't see this a lot. He was literally suing his university because he was wanting a presumption of innocence. His reasoning was, I have a narrow window here because I'm trying to go to the NBA, and by restricting me from playing after being accused of a crime that I'm saying I didn't commit, you're restricting me of my rights that I should be able to be played. So he sued the university. The judge agreed with that, and in essence, that's why he was allowed to return to play.
Okay, so we get to that point. My issue with the whole thing is not that Terrence Shannon was reinstated, not that Terrence Shannon was ever suspended. Handle it however you want to handle it. My issue was that when he was arrested, they triggered this policy and stood behind their policy. And when the injunction was granted, they did not stand up and say, we stand with Terrence Shannon because we believe in a young man. Those are the quotes that came after the not guilty verdict. We've always believed in Terrence Shannon, all that stuff, which is fine. But they didn't publicly express that, and they didn't stand on that. What they said was, hey, there's nothing we can do. It's out of our hands. The judge is ruling, and I thought that was not only wrong, just lame. Like, I would have respect for any, like, you ready for this? Going forward, a university standing up and saying, we know this young man, and we genuinely don't believe this is an accurate charge, and we're going to stand with him. We are uncomfortable ripping his last season of college basketball away under these circumstances because we believe in him. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I can at least respect that you're standing on something. I can also respect, we have a policy in place, and it doesn't matter if you're an All-American or not. We do not allow people under these circumstances to represent us in athletic competition. That's our policy. I stand on that. Stand on something. They stood on nothing. They took a very convenient way to say, okay, what we can just say, we don't have to stand up for Terrence Shannon, and we don't have to stand behind our policy that removes Terrence Shannon from the team. We can just say, the judge said what the judge said, and there's nothing we can do. It's out of our hands. I thought that was, again, I'm not fired up about it. That was a convenient way out of this, because there quite literally were things they could do. If they wanted to believe in their policy, they could have appealed it. They could have challenged it in other ways. They chose not to. Once the judge said what the judge said, they cowered and pushed their policy to the side, when quite literally there were things they could have done, which, let me be clear, might be because I've heard some people say this, well, thank God they did. Thank God they stood down, because otherwise they would have had an innocent man final season of college basketball ripped away. To that, I would say, I hear you. But that is an argument for maybe this policy shouldn't be in place to begin with. That's an argument against the policy. That's not an argument against anything else. And so my issue was always with that specifically, and nothing more. Quite literally, I'm sure other people, certainly student sections, expressed opinions about whether Terrence Shannon was innocent or guilty, whether he was this or that. Again, I never did it. I never commented on any of that. I merely talked about him as somebody who had been charged with rape and was playing college basketball under those circumstances. And respectfully, that in that moment was an accurate way to describe him.
Yeah, I would. If you're an Illinois fan checking in on this and fired up, go back and listen. Like, Parrish is pretty passionate on the subject, but he is recalling what he actually said there, and offered some strong opinions on it. And I completely get it. What I would caution, I'm not speaking directly to GPM, speaking to, I guess, everyone listening to the pod. If and when something like this happens again, people dig in their heels so aggressively on either side, and it is important. You don't get, I mean, these cases are often very messy, and frankly, for parties on both sides, like, the verdict is done, it's in, but there are effects that can be felt long after on both sides, no matter how a verdict winds up coming down. You don't get immediate answers on this. Oftentimes, evidence is lacking in these cases, and some people like to apply the result in one case and stick it philosophically to the next one or previous ones. It just doesn't work that way. So obviously, with Terrence Shannon Jr. being found not guilty amongst a jury of his peers in Kansas, deliberations took less than 2 hours, reportedly. Like,
and let me be clear.
This was an open shut case once it went to trial, apparently.
Based on the evidence involved, because there
basically was no evidence.
It shouldn't have taken 2 minutes.
Yeah.
It should not have taken 2 minutes to return a not guilty verdict. I mean, it got so wild in my mentions. People are like, "Oh, you must be sick that he was found not guilty." What? Like, based on everything I'm aware of, Terrence Shannon is an innocent man, or at the very least, there is a mountain of reasonable doubt, and there is no way anybody could have returned a guilty verdict there, based on the evidence that I saw. So the idea that I would be sitting around going, "Oh man, shucks," what? Like, it would be a tragedy. It is a tragedy anytime a young person is falsely accused and falsely and incorrectly charged and incorrectly convicted of a crime he or she did not commit. Like what? Again, it's all based in this sort of stuff has happened to me before. Like people get this idea that you said or did something, and it's like, that's not, I didn't say or do that, and then it just becomes a thing. Mike Woodson. Every time Mike Woodson would get like a 5-star recruit, somebody would tweet me like, "Oh, can Mike Woodson recruit now?" And I'm like, I never offered an opinion on whether Mike Woodson could
I think you did, actually.
I swear to God, I did. I went back and listened to everything and watched and read everything just to make sure. Like, I'm sure somebody did. And I might have privately had questions about it, but I didn't express them publicly ever. And it just became a thing. Like, and this was the same deal. Like, apologize to Terrence Shannon for calling him something that I never called him or even implied. Whatever. Let me ask you this, because Illinois, because earlier you said these things should be taken on a case-by-case basis. Well, the policy in place at Illinois that created this entire situation does not allow for these things to be taken on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, they are. Well, the first, you're talking about the first one.
Yes,
if you're charged, you're immediately suspended.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so like, based on the policy in place at Illinois, and I just think this is interesting to think about. Terrence Shannon should not have played basketball now. The last season. After he was arrested, he should have never played it at Illinois again, based on the policy in place. All right. That obviously would have been an awful thing had it happened, because he was found not guilty, and there appears there was no evidence that suggests he did what he was accused of doing. As far as I know, that policy is still in place at Illinois and other universities. Is that something people should look at? That policy that everybody says celebrates, like, people say, this is the way we take these things seriously. Well, the way you do it would have cost this young person his final year of college basketball, a trip to the Elite Eight, an opportunity to go to the final. It would have ripped it all away. Is that a policy universities should have? This is way above my pay grade, but like, you ready for this? I never said Terrence Shannon shouldn't be playing at Illinois. Illinois is the one that said Terrence Shannon shouldn't be playing at Illinois. It wasn't me or you.
These are the kind of questions and big picture questions, serious situations that universities have myriad meetings on long before they ever become official policy, obviously. And to have it, to say it should be the other way and be case by case, you open yourself up to even more criticism. Whereas, okay, player A had this happen and you decided to sit player A, but player B had this happen, you decided to sit player B. You invite more weighing one case versus the other. Whereas in this, if you actually get to the point where you are charged, and there was a certain threshold that had to happen with Terrence Shannon Jr., and it did, despite the not guilty verdict coming months later. I am breaking news. I am not a legal expert or a Title IX expert, so I'm not going to say it should necessarily be that way across the board. However, it does. I would anticipate that more universities than not will continue to have this policy in place because it protects them in this instance there. And I am interested to see whether it's college basketball, college football, anywhere else, and this is really pertaining to colleges, considering the parameters here. When we see something like this again, and if a judge would agree in this kind of case, because you can make, I understand why you're setting me up for this Q, GP, and you can make the argument that
I'm not even trying to set you up. I don't even know that there's a great answer for this. I don't know that there's a good way to handle these types of things.
I would say there isn't, and it just, my bottom line baseline on this is allegations of rape and sexual assault are among the most complicated cases, the most serious cases, and among the cases that get so polarizing in the public realm, because you're often dealing with an athlete that is beloved by a fan base that is willing to look past some issues. And I'm not speaking to TSJ here. I'm speaking generally, broadly speaking here. And so for every X amount of times when that does happen to be the case, and there was a conviction in a guilty verdict versus the much less frequent occurrences when there is a not guilty verdict found, it only makes these situations more flammable, people more skeptical on both sides. I can't say that it is a wrong policy to have in place, but it does set up situations like this where a university can basically default to the situation and the position that Illinois did. And I'm not even necessarily saying that's the wrong one, GP. We might slightly disagree there. You get to the point where you take it to a judge, say, here's my case, here's why you're restricting my right to presumption of innocence and my earnings potential, because if I don't play, like, this has long-term effects on my entire career. I'm telling you I did not do this. I'm telling you I am not guilty. And by restricting me from playing, the judge in that case clearly decided, okay, no, we're going to say we're going to override the suspension. You're going to be able to play. Not necessarily convinced that's the worst course of action here.
Okay, I guess to that I would just say, then fine, say that. The only thing that not aggravated, that's not even the right word, but that I kind of rolled my eyes at is the whole, it's out of our hands. It wasn't out of their hands. If they would have said, hey, we need to protect ourselves here, and whether we're comfortable with this or not, protecting ourselves now just includes allowing Terrence Shannon to lead us out of the tunnel, play X amount of minutes per game, take all the shots, whatever. All right. So that's where we're at. At that point, I'd go, well, I could say I disagree if I did, but I'd go, hey, I get it. I get that. Or they could say, well, listen, we're reinstating Terrence Shannon, not only because a judge ruled in this way, but because we believe in this young man. And we're not comfortable ripping away. We believe in this young man. We don't think he did this, and we're not going to ruin his final season of college basketball based on what we believe are false allegations. Instead, they tried to play it both sides. They tried to be like, we take all this very seriously, and this is our policy that we stand on. But, now there's nothing we can do. That's saying there's nothing we can do. It's out of our hands. And I'm not quoting it, but like that's certainly the message that was sent. I thought that was, I just don't think it's true, because it's not true. The idea that it was they had a next step if they wanted to take the next step in the spirit of standing behind the policy that they've created. And they didn't want to take that next step. And perhaps, you ready for this? For totally sensible and logical legal reasons. But that is not the way they explained it at all. They acted like there was nothing they could do once the judge ruled that way. And it wasn't true that day. It's still not true today. And that's it's the main issue that I raised.
Yeah, appreciate the listeners finding us, the ones that were doing so in good faith. And as always, I think we pride ourselves on the podcast for being willing to talk about the difficult subjects in the midst of them happening and being in the news, and then afterward, regardless of where we landed on a specific topic there. So we were not going to not address this on the show. And certainly Terrence Shannon Jr. deserved a long, lengthy segment about his not guilty verdict. Now the draft is just over a week away, and we'll see where he winds up getting picked. And I just, one last thing to echo here, and talking to a few folks, I have heard kind of the same from NBA folks, that with this coming down, in terms of like overall character profile, like it will be taken into consideration, but I don't think it's going to inhibit where he will be picked.